I'm so happy to be with you. So what I'm going to do is share my screen. I'm up here in the Hudson Valley in New York State, and I'm going to set it up like this. Okay. Um, this is the tagline that we use all the time to inspire young people to think about the world, their relationship to it, and their ability to influence it in an entirely new way. So that sort of frames out what I'm going to say this morning. I was given a few questions to address, so I'm going to frame everything that I say this morning around those questions. There are two ways to answer this first question about how EFS is different from what we're already doing. One is for a very specifically, how is it different from what you are already doing? And that would only be determined by a self-assessment, which I'm going to get to in a little bit, in a few minutes. The general answer to that question is we wouldn't need education for sustainability if there was no such thing as unsustainable. Clearly, it's possible to unintentionally undermine the social and physical systems upon which our lives depend. And that is not a good idea. We want to be contributing to the regenerative capacity of the social and physical systems. We want to be leaving this place better than we found it. And so to do that, we need to do something differently in schools because all systems are perfectly designed to get the results they get. So somehow, all things considered, we designed for unsustainability. We must have bought and sold for it. We invested in it, and we clearly unintentionally educated for it because that's what we've got. And education for a sustainable future is about the kind of thinking we need to do to get to the future we want. And that's because it's worth noting that our current reality is not the work of ignorant people. David Orr says it's actually the work of extremely well-educated people, many of whom have advanced degrees. And so if it's not a lack of education, we would argue that it's the education itself that has a key role to play in contributing to the shift toward a sustainable future. And so what is that different way of thinking? You might recall that Einstein said many, many wonderful things, but one of the ones I love and we use all the time is that the significant problems we face cannot be solved with the same thinking we used to create them in the first place. So education for sustainability is that different way of thinking. It's the best guess at the moment that we have for what that different way of thinking is that is going to help us to get to the future we want. I was just listening to the radio this morning, and many of our car companies in the US would like to lower our ambitions for 100% renewable vehicles as soon as possible. And so when I hear thinking like that, I know that those people were not educated for a sustainable future. If they were, they would be they would be using those constraints of regulations and emissions and so forth to drive creativity and to help us get to the future we want. And there are many, many other things they would do differently if they were in our care before they became car manufacturers. This is the front cover of our latest document called the Educating for a Sustainable Future, Benchmarks for Individual and Social Learning. These are the nested systems that benchmarks document takes into consideration. We think of sustainability as a whole systems frame, starting with thinking. And you'll see in the very smallest circle there, it's all about the thinking, the big ideas, the thinking skills, the knowledge, applied knowledge, because education for sustainability is not an intellectual exercise. It is actually designed to help us get to the future we want. Influence, because thinking drives behavior and behavior causes results. So if you don't like the results you're getting, the most upstream place to intervene in the system is to think about the thinking and metacognition. And the next most upstream place is the thinking itself. And then applying all of that learning in our behaviors and our actions, and of course our dispositions. All of that is nested inside our instructional practices, in our classrooms. Our classrooms are nested inside our schools and the organizational policies and practices. All of that is nested inside physical attributes, the actual buildings with energy and food and transportation and so forth, and in some cases investments, right out to the relationship between the community and the school and how we can be resources for one another. And then, of course, um, there's no such thing as a closed system on the planet, so those systems keep going out. But we think that schools and communities learning and working together for the future we want is the core unit of study to contribute to accelerate the shift towards sustainability. Why do the EFS benchmarks matter? Um, it's a great question. I thought the best way to address that question is to talk a little bit about the research that we have. We don't have enough, and so I invite everybody who's building curriculum and what we call sustainabilizing curriculum to build those things, pilot them, revise them, get them in a shareable state, and then share them with us so that we can put them, first of all, on the reservoir, on our EFS collective reservoir, which will be a database of exemplars, and so that we can get more and more research done to demonstrate the efficacy of this work. So one of the things we know for sure in the research that we do have is that education for sustainability improves student achievement for many, many reasons. Partially because kids are engaged, they love this work, it's very hopeful, it's exciting, it's fun, and it involves all the best instructional practices, so it works. And so we know that, and that's extremely useful to know if you're still trying to convince your school or your district to get in this game. We know that it has a positive effect on kids, on their social health, their physical health, all kinds of data on better choices, better eating choices, and so forth, and also on increased civic engagement and interest in democratic participation. We also know that it makes happier teachers for, again, obvious reasons. It's very hopeful, it's very robust. It doesn't take any more time or more money to educate for sustainability than it does to educate for unsustainability. In fact, it takes less time and less money if you think of it that way. So teacher happiness, when kids are on fire and happy, teachers are generally happy. That's what we live for. And we have evidence that education for sustainability can help with that too. It also is particularly useful for school culture and to reinvigorate the energy in a school. And it also has an impact. At the end of the day, if it doesn't contribute to sustainability itself and the indicators, measurable indicators of sustainability in terms of social cohesion, good water, good air, and so forth, strong economy, you know, what are we doing? So we know that when done comprehensively over time, this work has powerful results. And to me, that is the reason why the benchmarks matter. The next question was, how did the benchmarks get developed? It's a great question. And the way that I would describe it is that if you think of this as the whole system of education for sustainability, in the official birth of sustainability as a concept, that word was 1987 in a UN report called Our Common Future. And I had been in the first global education experiment as a child from 6th grade to 12th grade. So when I was 11, I entered that program in Evanston, Illinois, and we were tracking the state of the planet data at that time in 1968. So I've been tracking the state of the planet data all that time. And for all the progress we had made in various parts of the world, there were some major foundational systems, health, going in the wrong direction. But we didn't have a word to describe that. And in 87, the word sustainability arrived on the radar, and I thought, oh, I'm tracking unsustainability. What's sustainability? That seems like a better idea. And how do you educate for it? Am I already educating for it? By that time, I had grown up to become a global educator because I thought that was the edgiest, most 21st century thing there was. But then this new idea came about, and I thought, that's more concrete. Even though people think of the word sustainability as quite abstract, I think of it as quite concrete. Are we leaving the place better than we found it? Are we contributing to the health of the place and the systems that we depend on? That seems obvious, and you can measure it. And so by 92, there was a big international summit, and that was the official birth of the field of education for sustainability. It was born in a document that 174 countries signed called Agenda 21, and it's our little chapter 36 was the beginning. And so at that time, my colleagues in ministries of education all over the world started creating national agendas to educate for sustainability. In the US, we were a few little NGOs, non-governmental organizations, and a few university centers holding the space for this field. We've never had a huge support from the Department of Education nationally. But little by little, different states and different regions started to do the work. So those of us that are practitioners and service providers in the field and thought leaders, we started to define the piece of the elephant that we could see from where we were standing. If you think of this picture as the whole elephant, each of us picked a different piece that we wanted to focus on. So the Cloud Institute had our piece. We focused in on some big ideas and the core content standards and performance indicators. Center for Eco-Literacy focused in on eco-literacy and so forth. So we all had a piece of the elephant. And then several years ago, the U.S. Green Building Council got very much involved in the development of green schools. And when they did, they called me one day and said, we want to help you all measure the impact of education for sustainability. I said, I think that's a great idea. What is it? And they said, oh, Jane, we thought you knew. And I said, well, I have the piece of the elephant I've been focused on. I stand behind it, but everybody's got a different piece, and we're not ready. We haven't defined the field as a field. Each of us has defined it the way we see it. We're not ready. And as soon as I said that, I realized we needed to get ready. And the very next day, the Journal for Sustainability Education called and asked me to be the guest editor, and thus the benchmarks. And so we decided to make a call to all the authors and thought leaders around the world who'd spent 30 years thinking about this. And we asked them to send the essential elements. We did a grounded theory methodology and a meta-analysis, and what emerged, like the Phoenix, was the benchmarks. This is our best guess at the moment for what education for sustainability includes. And it does not get down to the detail level of performance indicators, but that's where the rest of us, if there's any part of this that you want to go deeper on, then you can go to any of us who have been spending time with that piece of the elephant. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of understanding of how these benchmarks were developed. First we did the matrix that's on the journal website at susted.com. Then we did the benchmarks, and now we're developing the reservoir, which I mentioned earlier, which is a collection of exemplars. And we need all the exemplars we can get. So eventually we can get to proficiency scales. I know you're all excited about that. How can we use the EFS benchmarks? This is a great question. The first thing, I think we've identified at least 4 ways we can use the benchmarks, and you all can use the benchmarks. One is adoption. So I think it's really helpful when a school or a district or a state says, we want to educate for sustainability, and they say it out loud, and then they adopt a set of standards to address. Because this is not instant orange juice, and this is not a simple task. We need to turn this big ship around, and we need to do it with our thinking. And we need all the children and young people who are legally required to be with us thinking in these new ways. This is a new paradigm we're bringing in. So we think it's important for districts and schools to adopt the standards. It would be great if they adopted the benchmarks and then chose the folks that they wanted to work with. We think that's really important. Yes, individual teachers can do it on their own, but we really need whole schools and districts and their communities focused on these different ways of thinking that are going to help us get to the future we want. The next way to use the benchmarks is alignment and a crosswalk. So certainly, as you look at the benchmarks and the Cloud Institute standards and performance indicators, you can begin to identify where your curriculum is aligned. It's not a gap if it's not aligned. So the first order of business is to figure out where and when would these different standards and performance indicators and dispositions live well in our curriculum, in the curriculum that we already have. We are in some cases, it might require some new work, but for the most part, we sustainabilize what exists. So the first thing to do is to identify where are we going to sustainabilize. The third area that we can use the benchmarks is in designing. Designing, sustainabilizing new curricula, existing curricula, professional development, coaching, building it into our assessments and our performance criteria. We really need to bake it in and make it the new normal, because unintentionally educating for unsustainability doesn't make any sense. And then the last one, of course, is to do self-assessments and audits of existing curriculum assessments, performance criteria, and so forth. And ultimately, student work. We need to be able to identify where we're already educating for sustainability and where we need to make some changes. So we embed 4 questions. What are we already doing we should keep doing? What do we need to change? What do we need to stop doing? And what do we need to start doing? So those are the ways that we recommend using them. If you all find other ways to use them, let me know and I will add your ways to the list. Where do I start sustainabilizing? How do I choose? Of course, we had to make up that word sustainabilizing. I do a lot of coaching with educators and curriculum designers. And we always say, you know, in a system, a curriculum is a system. There's no beginning or end in a system. You start with their favorable conditions, which usually means where you want to start. So sometimes it might be a series of lessons or a unit that you love, that you want to make better. And in some cases, it might be a unit that you've never quite loved, that needs help anyway, and you've never had a chance to deal with it. And so this gives you a great opportunity to do so. And so you would take the existing curriculum, the unit or the series of lessons as a starting point, do that alignment I was talking about, determine where EFS big ideas or enduring understandings and where those performance indicators will add value to that unit. And then you're going to embed it right into the assessments and the performance criteria, and ultimately look for evidence of it in your student work. And then you're going to keep going back around, and it will never end. Curriculum is a living being. It should be that way. It should be a commons in the building. We're big fans of documenting and mapping curriculum. If you've had a bad experience with that, I can give you the whole list of things that didn't go well. But don't hold that against documentation and mapping. It's really important, because if you can see the curriculum, you can sustainabilize it. And just one last thing about that, there is no such thing as an add-on, because there will never be more time. So we believe that sustainabilizing is like learning new vocabulary. When you learn new vocabulary, your sentences don't just keep getting longer and longer, they actually get shorter, because now you have a more effective and efficient way to say what you want to say. And with that, I believe I've hit my 20 minutes, and I wish you all well, and I wish you a great day at the symposium.
That's awesome, Jamie. Thank you.